The UK is set to announce its new Defence Secretary after the incumbent Ben Wallace officially tendered his resignation. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will announce the new Defence Secretary later on today. Well, we know that Ben Wallace had announced earlier that he will leave his current position at the next cabinet reshuffle. Downing Street has refused to reveal the name of Wallace's successor. Two candidates are touted as Tory favourites for the job. One is Armed Force Minister James Heappey. The other is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn. Some reports also name the former Defence Secretary Liam Fox as returning to his former post. Well, Heappey, a former army major who served in Afghanistan, has been the Member of the Parliament since 2015. Later on, he also served as Parliamentary Private Secretary for the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, John Glenn, a former management consultant, held a number of government roles. This includes Parliamentary Undersecretary for Arts, Heritage and Tourism. Well, there's no denying, however, that the UK's next Defence Secretary has a tough task on hand. And one of the primary reasons for being the war, of course, in Ukraine. That is the biggest challenge for them. Now, the UK has been a staunch ally for Ukraine since Russia invaded the country in February last year. Weapons, equipment and aid have been pumped in, besides assurances as well of moral support from Britain. Well, this has put enormous pressure on the UK's own arsenal as well. The replacement for Wallace also needs to be ready with a policy for the UK's interest in the Pacific region. Very important. Now, the AUKUS deal with the US and Australia is essential for Britain to maintain its relevance in the region. Finding a replacement for Ben Wallace, who has served continuously as a minister under 5 prime ministers, is not going to be an easy task. Well, to talk this through, we have our correspondent Alex Isaac joining us just now. Now, Ben Wallace, he is very well thought of here in Britain and abroad as well because of his stance on Ukraine. He's been very vocal and very passionate about it all. He was also in the running, as I mentioned earlier, to be a contender to take over from Boris Johnson when everyone was putting their hat in the ring. He said because of family reasons, actually, he wasn't a contender for that job. It's a blow. We also heard as well, there was a rumour that he was going to be taking over as the head of NATO, but that's kind of been sidelined as well. Now, the important thing here, Alex, is everyone's asking who is going to overtake. It's a huge undertaking for anybody because of the situation, the illegal invasion of Russia into Ukraine. So who's up for the job and who's going to get it?
Well, we've actually just had a confirmation that Grant Shapps has the job. He is replacing Ben Wallace as Defence Secretary. He will become the new Secretary later on today. Of course, Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, had already tweeted out before the government announced Grant Shapps would be taking over. So, of course, there's going to be some slight contention there. But it looks like Grant Shapps is the one to go forward, which was it's an interesting choice. The ones that you had mentioned did have some security background and experience. Grant Shapps doesn't have that. He has had 4 different roles in the past year, and now he's taking on this particular role. But what he does have is a lot of communication skills. He has a lot of background to help Rishi Sunak, and he is a very loyal man to Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, as well. So that will really help. Ben Wallace was well thought of within all opposition parties, and in fact many people have been sending out their responses about Ben Wallace stepping down, but it was always inevitable. His seat as MP has gone, and he, as you rightly say, he was looking to that NATO position, which unfortunately wasn't backed by the US, even though Rishi Sunak did push him to go forward. So now we have Grant Shapps, a great orator, someone who has been in many positions. Even when Liz Truss let him go from her own cabinet, she did commend his speaking and said that he was great to have on the team. So we're looking forward. What's he going to be bringing as Defence Secretary? Well, it's going to be a lot of discussions about how the budget's going to move forward. Ben Wallace was known to be a bit of a stick in the mud when it came to trying to get more money outside of the budgets that were given to him. And of course, that was very supported from the armed forces. But when it comes to the cost of living and the inflation crisis, it wasn't thought well upon from his own Conservative Party members. Grant Shapps doesn't really have that real tit for tat within the Parliament. People seem to like him. The Conservatives seem to be backing him. So looking ahead towards a general election, it does seem like, even though it's a strange choice that he hasn't had any of this defence background, it's a positive choice as we head towards the general election, as someone that can stand up for the Conservatives and help them move forward.
Yeah, this is very interesting. Breaking news with Alex Isaac for us here on WION. Just been announced that the Energy Secretary, the former Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, is to be named as the Defence Secretary. That news has just come out in the last few minutes or so. Now, he does replace Ben Wallace, who has formally quit as the Defence Secretary here in the UK, promising Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that he has his full support there going forward. It's an interesting one with Ben Wallace because, as we were saying before, Alex, he is well thought of here in the UK and indeed abroad as well, because he has been such a powerful force when it comes to defending Ukraine's sovereignty and going against Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. There's also been a few sort of controversies over the last few months as well. We know you mentioned the budget as well. Ben Wallace has very much been pushing for a bigger budget when it comes to defence, but that's what defence secretaries do.
Well, absolutely, and it's one of those things that Ben Wallace was well atoned for. Even Rishi Sunak said in his statement when Ben Wallace handed in his resignation, said how much Ben Wallace had done for the country, for Ukraine, but it was time for him to step down. And it does feel that Grant Shapps has also been chosen because he won't make as much of a big deal. Of course, there's going to be these discussions about what we're still going to do about the war in Ukraine, and also with the defence budget here within the UK. That's still an ongoing conversation to be had. But Grant Shapps doesn't seem to be one to make a huge steadfast waves. It looks like he will just be able to potentially go with the flow, especially when this cost of living crisis, as I mentioned, and inflation, the government is still borrowing money. And if that money is going towards defence, many people will be asking, why is it going to a lot more closer to home? And Grant Shapps has done a lot of those jobs that are closer to home. So he is in a position to at least be able to look over all of the budgets, hopefully, and give an analysis and potentially help the country move forward for defence and for home issues as well.
Okay, Alex Isaac, thank you so much with breaking news for us this morning live that the former Energy Secretary Grant Shapps has been named as the new Defence Secretary of the UK, taking over from Ben Wallace, who recently resigned. Thank you so much.